Some tool options for shaving your foam down to the shape that you want. A Surform or cheese grater works really well. Any kind of saw, something like a drywall saw or just any conventional carpentry saw works. Hacksaw blade works really nice. You can even make a fancy handle with duct tape if you decide to. So for example, the benefit of that is that it's very flexible. Obviously I'm going to cut that whole piece out, but it just works really nice. You can also use any kind of an air tool. This will generate a mess like you've never seen in your life, so beware of that. I would definitely wear some kind of face mask if you can find one now with the pandemic going on. At least a bandana or something because of all of the dust that it generates. But we want to shape one half according to our artistic sensibilities and what fits on the car that we're happy with, and then we're going to make templates from that. After quite a bit of whittling, I've gotten one half of the buck to a point that I'm pretty happy with the shape. A couple of effective tools I neglected to mention before. An electric carving knife like you use on a turkey works really well. Also, a Sawzall with a really long blade, like a 10-inch blade. Those work quite well for the initial rough cutting. So for example, now that I know where my shape is going to end up, I know that all of this is extra, and so the faster I can lop that off, the better. I've also used like a tree pruning saw, one of those big ones that's kind of shaped like a bow. That would work too. Anything goes for the rough removal of material. You can sand the surface according to whatever your sensibilities are. If it's easier to read visually with it smoother, just take a sanding block, preferably a flexible one, so it will conform to the curves, and you can clean that up. Then, in order to get the other side symmetrical, the key is to have templates that fit this side nicely, but then also they are referenced to this flat tabletop surface. Let's see, I think that one goes right there. If I don't have that flat bottom, then it's really not going to be very accurate, because you can see how much even a slight change in just how much I tilt it, how that will prevent it from fitting. However, if they are all referenced off the flat table, then all of a sudden I have a standard reference that makes them very accurate. So I'm going to, with every template, I would put the protractor on there to make sure that I'm truly at 90 degrees. You would like to be perpendicular to the surface as much as possible. So I've got a station there, a station here, one there, and one on the end. You could add more stations if you want. The more stations you have, the more accurate you'll be able to reproduce whatever you come up with. On one side, it's just giving you a little bit more surface information. I want to zero in a little bit on this front section for another detail. At the top corner of the buck, there's a curve here, and I put a station at this point. When there gets to be a lot of shape change, you'd like to have more stations. It gets to a point where it's too difficult to keep track of everything and make them all line up with each other. And so what I did here was, because I had this kind of dramatic slope here, I have a center template right there, or station, if this were a station buck. And then I made another one for this point right here, but with this dropping off so rapidly, I found that I could make it fit a little bit. It would give me a little bit more information if I turned the station slightly like that. And so the way that I determined at what point I should place the station, I measured out 4 inches from the edge of the buck. I moved over 1.25 inches, and that's the angle at which this template fits the buck really cleanly. If I were a mathematologist, I might calculate what angle that is and transfer it to the other side, but for non-mathematologists, it's easier to just measure out a fixed distance, move over another fixed distance, and then they'll be the same from side to side. I'm going to take another view of this higher up so you can see how closer to the top of the buck, how it makes a difference with how much information I can capture across the curvy nose of the buck. So there's just another view to show how that records the curvature up here. If you wanted to, at any point, you can add more templates. Just measure off the same distance from side to side, and you can add them anywhere you want. The next thing I'll show is how to create each of these templates so they'll be accurate. Here's how to make accurate templates that you can use to transfer the curvature from one side of your buck to the other side. This works really well for making stations in a wood buck too, if you're trying to copy a fender. I'm going to use some cardboard that's cut at a 90-degree angle. The wider this platform on the bottom, the more useful it will be as a template, just because that's my standard of reference. Some of mine could have been a little bit wider, but well, I think they'll work all right. Hopefully you'll have a divider better than this. If I can make good templates with this crummy divider, imagine what a competent person could do with a decent set of dividers or compass. So I'm going to set this to my largest gap. If I had a bigger compass that I could span that gap, I would, and this would go a lot faster, but this was the only one I could find right now. So I'm setting it to the largest gap that I have. I'm going to keep it straight up and, well, I'm calling it straight up and down. I guess it's, I realize that pencil line is not going to show up very well. I usually don't have to sketch it like that, but I try to make one clean pass. What the detail that makes all the difference is if you keep this compass consistent as you follow the curves, you'll get a perfectly recorded line that duplicates the original. If you follow the curve and turn the compass along with the curve, then your line is parallel with the curve and it ends up being larger than it needs to be, and you'll never get the right dimension. But if you can keep this, I guess in this case I'm calling it straight up and down. I guess it's perfectly horizontal. If this compass stays perfectly horizontal with the ground over the curved path, it will give you the perfect line. So I've I've got one line drawn on here. I'm going to cut that out. Because my compass is so small, it's going to take several cuts, but each time I cut it out, I'll be able to get more of the template to fit, and eventually we'll get there. I'll do another cut or two and we'll see how it looks. Here's the template after one cut. I simply cut out the first line that I drew down the edge, and it fits really nicely. I just need to do the same thing again, recut it, and then more of the template will fit. Sometimes little details make a big difference. I went over this with a ballpoint pen just so it would show up, if it even shows up. The important things that I wanted to mention: if you trim cardboard on top of a piece of wood, it will do a better job, and your cutting edges will last longer. I'm cutting on a piece of plywood just with a razor blade. Also, the other thing, make 2 cuts. Even with a new razor blade, it will take 2 cuts, possibly more. This one's made a few cuts already, but I'm hoping that it's got enough life left to get that piece off of there. Try to resist the temptation to rip off something that you cut. You'll get a much cleaner edge if you can just force yourself to cut again. There we go, until the piece comes off freely. So just those small details, cutting against the wood, make more than one cut, and you'll do a lot better job on cutting out your templates. Now, if you get a template that fits reasonably close, but it's not quite there, you can take a sanding block and clean up that edge a bit. So let's say I wanted to remove just a little bit of material, something like that. You can get a much more accurate template that way. So after 2 cuts, that one fits nicely. Remember, it's important that that bottom sits flat against the tabletop. That's going to be your point of reference for transferring this to the other side.